In this video, I'm going to give you some tips for how to double big, crunchy guitar tracks. From years of doing session work and producing tracks, I've developed a protocol that I think works really well. If you're the player or the producer, this should improve your workflow and also help you get a better sound, a better result. Let's start by listening to the track I'm going to play over. Just a big raw drum track. Bass coming in at bar 9. All right, I'm just going to play some big crunchy guitars, and for this example, I'm going to use a Les Paul, and I'm going to use a THU amp emulation. This is my setting. My first tip for you is when you record the first take, keep track of the unique or different things you do, the different rhythms, the different accents. You know you're going to have to replicate them the second time around. My next tip is to do the second take immediately after the first. That way it's still logged into your short-term memory. Maybe even have the next track set up ahead of time so you can get there quickly. My third tip is when I record the next take, I'm going to pan my first take to the right, in this case, hard pan to the right, and then the track I'm going to record, I'm going to have already hard panned to the left. That way I can hear whether I'm totally in sync with the first track or hear the differences. So one take will be in the right ear and the other in the left. There are also times I like to have the screen in front of me so I can watch the first take while I'm recording the second. Just simply seeing the audio file will sometimes help me keep better in sync. You may have noticed on the first track I used a Les Paul, and when I doubled it, I used a PRS. And that leads me to my next tip, which is to use two different complementary guitars when possible. This will make the track sound much wider and much bigger. Both guitars are double coils, and in either case, I used the bridge pickup. If you can't do that, if you don't have two different guitars, then try changing up the amp head or the cabinet. This will also widen the tracks. And this is true whether you're using hardware or plugins. Now I've done a little bit of work on these tracks, so let's go ahead and take a listen to where we're at. So one of the things I did was I went back and looked at my amp settings, and I cut back on the amount of gain that I was using. This is the beautiful thing about using emulations and not hardware or real heads and amps, is you can go back and change it after you've recorded. And on both of these, I trimmed back the amount of distortion. the amount of gain. And that leads me to this tip, which is to use the least amount of distortion that you need to get your desired sound. So whatever that sound is, you need to use the least amount of this, the least amount of gain or distortion. If you don't, if you overdo the gain, then what happens when you process it with EQ and compression and doubling is you wind up hearing an awful lot of the distortion, the high end, rather than the tone of the guitar. So what I always do is try to use the least amount, and then I can always bump it up later. Even if I use hardware or amps, I can come back in and reamp or add other sorts of distortion in the form of plugins. If you're having trouble deciding how much distortion you want to use, a good idea might be to use a reference track. Listen to a recording that you like, that the distortion sounds right or the guitars sound good to you. In this case, maybe an AC/DC track would be a good reference track. Go back and listen, and I think if you did that, you'd be surprised on how little of gain they actually used with recordings like this. It was the tone and the doubling of the guitars that made their tracks sound so huge. All right, so let's look a little deeper into the processing of these tracks. We'll take a look at the Les Paul, and they're both going to be pretty similar. So after the amplifier, I've got an EQ. I'm cutting out the lows. I don't really need any subs on a guitar track. And then I've boosted some highs. That's just going to make it sit in the mix a little bit better. I've also taken a second EQ. Again, I've dumped out the lows, but mostly this one's about just trying to trim out a little frequency that seemed to be a little bit strong. So usually in this area, I can find something on a guitar track like this that's a little bit potent, and I want to just dump out a little bit of it. And then next, I've got a CLA 3A. I like this compressor a lot when I've got a right and a left track of something. I like putting one on each side and letting them trigger according to that track. And then what happens is I'm running through a track stack, and on this, I use my favorite compressor of all time, the Distressor. It's great on guitar tracks. I've recorded tons of guitar tracks with the actual Distressor hardware, and I like to use the software as well. And then lastly, I've got a little bit of reverb. This is an idea I want to put forth too, is I don't generally use the amp's reverb, the spring verb or whatever else is built into an amp. Matter of fact, the stuff I use with hardware doesn't have reverb built into it. I like to be able to control my reverb afterwards, and on a track like this, it's going to be a very short reverb, a very light mix. I'm not looking for an awful lot here because I've already got these huge, massive tracks. It doesn't need much help from this. I just want to add a little bit of touch to make it sound bigger than life or like an actual room you're listening in. My next tip has to do with an arrangement idea. So if we want a section to pop, maybe it's a chorus or some big section of the song, what we might do is take a double out before it. So what I'll do here is mute this track. And then, so it doesn't sound too strange, what I'll do is go up to this track that's going to be on its own and not have it hard panned. I'll just have it a little bit panned here, and then I'll widen it when I get to bar 9. So it'll sound like this. So that'll make a section really pop out. That'll wake you up. That's pretty cool. I love that approach, and you will hear that in some AC/DC songs. That's where I originally heard it, I think, years and years and years and years and years and years ago. So it's a great technique. It's a great idea. Try it. I think you'll find it's really effective. Sometimes in this style of music, you'll want to play power chords that last right up until the next chord plays. Make them very legato. In this case, my suggestion is to commit to punching in on each chord one at a time in advance. This will save you a lot of time because there's going to be a natural gap that occurs if you try to change chords from one to the next. In this case, just plan on punching in each one and you'll have very smooth legato chords. This next tip might fall more into the personal preference category, but I like to use the Shure 57 when I'm miking cabinets, whether they're real or plugins. The 57 is punchy, gives me a nice mid-range, and some of the other microphones actually pick up too much detail, maybe too many frequencies for my taste. So try the 57, see what you think. So after having done all that, it becomes important to level the tracks to make sure we're hearing an equal amount in the right speaker and in the left speaker. Let's take a listen. Now, most of this I've done by ear, but you can also pay attention to the meters. So let's take a look at the right and now the left. So you're going to hear some bounciness between the right and the left, and I actually like that. But remember, we're going through a track stack, so there's also a compressor there. That's going to level things out. What I didn't mention earlier was the mix is not 100% here. I want a little bit to come through, so I don't have this at 100%. I'm allowing some of that signal to come on through. It takes practice to do a good job of doubling tracks. Most people struggle with this at first. My suggestion is to create drum loops and practice recording. I had to become good at this out of necessity. Session work required it. Okay, I hope this helps. And remember, when in doubt, play loud.